Hello, this is Will Faerber from Art to Ride, and today we're looking at the third submission by Tytti from Sweden. And we've seen a couple of videos of the past of this horse, and she's done a good job of getting him moving forward and active. But I suggested, after she sent in her last tape, that she go back to the lunging, and I'd like to just see that the foundation work is correct before we go any further, and that we can really get the horse working over its back from the ground. What I felt like after watching the other video, which I didn't put up on the site because there just wasn't enough difference there, and I asked her then to go back and do this video, and let's go back to the very beginning and get him really working over his back from the ground, and then approach it from under saddle, because there just wasn't enough good work happening to really make it very valuable for the horse. That's what you've got to remember is, you're only got so much time. And when you ride a horse, you're basically, it's going to get tired. But what we want to do is activate the correct muscles as soon as we can, so that we work them as much as possible without exhausting the horse. Because what happens to a lot of horses, if they're just hollow, they can go around hollow so long that they just exhaust themselves, and then you've got nothing to work with, if they can't really carry you. And that's really kind of what I saw here with this horse, is that he was just a little too hollow and too slow behind, and just really wasn't working hard enough under saddle to really make it very valuable for him. So what I'd like to see her do is go back to this groundwork like this, and you've also got to remember what type of horse this is. This is quite a heavy set kind of horse, more of a workhorse, cold-blooded kind of horse, as we try to say, which are wonderful horses for people to ride on, and wonderful horses, and they're great for beginners because they're so patient and quiet. But some of them can be quite difficult, to sort of light a fire under. So you've always got that issue, is that, they can be too dull. So that's where in fitness comes in very important. If you're going to ride one of these horses as a dressage horse and a sport horse, you're going to have to do a lot of sort of cardiovascular fitness with it, because you got to remember that a horse that's built like this was essentially, originally made for pulling something, either a plow or a carriage or something like that, or they were often multi-use horses that would be ridden sometimes and would pull something, and they needed them to be very strong, which this horse obviously is. He could probably just really pull his weight, but we want to make him into a riding horse as well, so it's going to be very important that we get him physically fit. Now you can see here in the walk, she's been really nice and active, and he's really getting over his back really well. So to me, what I'm saying is that this is much more useful work for the horse than to be ridden upside down for an hour at a time. So as he gets stronger, and this is also something that's very important to people who are rehabbing horses. You can rehab a horse in the walk for months, and I've had to do it many times with horses that had injuries that they just couldn't do anything but walk. But if you get them over the back, you can get them amazingly fit. When I did a lot of fox hunters in my early days on the East Coast, real field hunting horses, we hacked them for hours every day, always stretching out long and getting them moving and active, so to build up that conditioning, and then also, of course, with 3-day event horses. So once again, that's also important with a horse like this. Most of our modern horses, we don't have to worry about that much because they've got enough thoroughbred that we're usually trying to keep them from getting too fit. But a horse like this, you want to get him, if you're going to use him as a riding horse, he's going to need to be fit in order to keep that his own weight from sort of dragging him down. But this is really good in the walk now. He's really coming through, and he's swinging. His neck is stretching out long. And look how long that neck really is. But you can also see when he comes around to the side how sort of saggy he is at the top. He's like a weak bridge, and that's what's so important. You got to remember the back is what bridges the two ends together. And you can kind of see when he stretches out his neck how little there really is there, even though it looks like quite a thick neck when he pulls it back like a turtle into his body, which is how he's been going. But when we get to stretch out, it's actually quite long and looks actually quite weak because there's almost a dip in it on the top as there is in his back a little bit. So that was really good walk work. You can't do too much of that. I would even encourage even doing more of that. So she's moving into the trot work now. And he's moving pretty actively. Once again, this is much more useful for him than when I saw you riding the horse. I would like to see a lot of this. Were it I'd probably spend a few months doing nothing but this with this horse, because I'm never in a hurry to ride a horse. If you get on before they really go well on the ground, they're going to be whatever they were when you got on them is how they're going to be, in other words. Whereas when we lunge horses, we get to warm them up, we see how they're moving, but they're never going to move better with you on top of them because your weight's going to interfere with their movement, is kind of what I'm saying here. So if the horse doesn't look like something you want to ride on the end of a lunge line, you probably don't want to ride it, because if its mouth is busy and you see the mouth is opening and closing and it can't take a quiet contact, you know that the horse is not ready to be ridden because it hasn't even accepted contact with the bridle. But in a short time, it will. That's the thing. If you do this right, and then you can start building on a good foundation, which she is well on her way to getting here. So I love the way he's moving here in this shambone. It's much better than it was when you were riding him. He's swinging much more actively over his back. I'd like to see him stretching and staying in the stretch a little more consistently, but this is really quite good. Now another simple exercise would be just to lunge him over a single pole, and this kind of reminds me of that. I've been meaning to do a lesson on that, and I will do it very soon and post a video on how to go about doing that, is just lunging over a single pole. And that's just what I mean. It's just putting a single ground pole there so the horse has to trot over it. And you'll see very clearly when he comes up whether he's hollow in his back or is not, because if he throws his head straight up in the air and lifts the knees high, you know that the horse hollowed his back. When he stays low and swings the back through over the pole, you know he's working over his back. Once again, as I said, I will do a video about that very soon. Now this is also the type of horse that you might want to think about ground driving. It can be effective for this type of horse. If you go on the website, you'll see a whole series on there on how to ground drive. The biggest danger with ground driving is that you will take too much contact in your hands and end up pulling the horse behind the bridle, which is what often happens to people when they try to ground drive hotter-blooded type horses. But generally speaking, it's a good thing to mix in. The thing is that the line around the back of the horse's legs will get it kind of activated. But if you do that every day, it'll quickly forget about that. The same thing that happens with these Nelson Pessoa rigs that we see people using. They have a bar around the back. But not only is there a bar around the back that is it's a fleece line rope, of course, but the rope ties to the horse's mouth. So every time the horse moves, its hind legs pull its head down, which is, of course, really, really wrong thinking. So I highly recommend to stay away from those things. These kind of gadgets that are just too much gadget. And what I see all the time with those Nelson Pessoa rigs is they work for the first couple of days because the horses get scared by the rope around the back of their legs. But once they get used to it in a couple of days, if you don't know how to lunge correctly, it's not going to do you any good anyway. So that's the basic thing, and we'll end up getting hurt. I've even seen people tied up in the ropes trying to get them onto the horses. So we want to use as little cumbersome equipment as we possibly can. Less stuff to get caught up in. Now she's come back to a walk here, and this looks really good. For him, that is. He's improving all the time, and he's stretching a little more there. I like how you get behind him there and get him a little more active. So as I was saying, you might want to take a look at the long reining exercises on the video, and if you think you're up to it. Now, that is something that really should only be approached by somebody who's really good on their feet and competent with horses, as it can be quite dangerous, as you can get caught up in the lines. So you might take a look at that. If you feel up to it, you might at least try heading in that direction with it. I'd take you through all the steps on there so to do it in the most safe manner. So you might want to take a look at that. It might be good for him as an alternative to just lunging every now and then. And once again, the idea of just doing a single pole, just set it up next to a rail so he's got like a little guard and a little guide, and go over it. But this is quite good for this horse. Once again, I think this is a much more useful kind of workout for this horse than what I was seeing in the riding, is that I just wasn't seeing the horse spending enough time in the right frame, that is over his back, for it to really do him any good. And what we have to remember is that we don't want anything to become a habit. And the problem is that most horses, when they're coming to us and we're trying to get them right side up, they're in the habit of going hollow, so they continue to go hollow. So every step we take with the horse hollow just reinforces that hollowness, so to speak. So what we want to do is get the horse working correctly over its back, and even if that's only in the walk, it has more value to walk with the horse over its back in the walk for 10 minutes than to ride around in a trot and canter with the horse hollow for however length of time, because remember, whenever the horse is hollow, you're basically wearing out the tires. You're driving a car with no suspension. So it's best to stick to the walk, and there's nothing wrong with walking. A horse like this, once you can get him to stretch, for instance, these kind of horses that are a little quiet, if you've got good trails around you, go out there and work him on the trails. If that gets him a little more active, go out and put a horse in front of him and go with another horse. We did that a lot, in my early days when I was training hunters and also training 3-day event horses, So you can kind of use their natural instinct to want to keep up. I inherited a horse that was going to be put down some years ago that had been trained by one of the Rolker trainers and had basically reached the point where he just hated humans and anything to do with it. And basically, you couldn't even get him near a dressage ring. But I took him fox hunting for a year, and that straightened his mind out. But just getting behind other horses, because this horse was so sour, I just got him out without making any demands and just let him do what he wanted to do, cantering around behind the field. And he got back into life again. So once again, remember that's a big part of it, because horses can be really checked out, you know, when their training has been bad and their whole life has just been, you know, forcing them into some horrible frame or other, you know, or being ridden by somebody who's too heavy for them, and you just, you know, no one really conditioning or preparing them for the work that they do. So this way of working, the horse becomes a willing participant. Very important. And so getting that willingness, sometimes if we have horses that are really sour, that's what we have to do. Put them in something else. But the principles of how we ride them remain the same. Our goals will remain exactly the same. So there is no difference if you are a good rider in riding in the ring and riding outside of the ring. You know, as Jacques Le Goff, the famous French 3-day event coach for the United States, and sadly enough, he was fired here, and it was too bad that he was not able to influence a greater number of horsemen here before getting fired. And because our team was the best it really had ever been, and still has ever been to this day when he was the coach of it. And from what I understand, the scuttlebutt I always heard over the years was that was the issue, was he did not want the use of draw reins on horses, and had an argument with some of the other riders about that, who felt that was the way to do it. So good up on you, Jack, for keeping it right, and reminding us that, you know, jumping is just dressage with fences in the way. So get your horse working correctly and the fences will be no problem. So once again here, she's back in a trot. He's a little high-headed here once again, but I'm sure he's going to stretch out here in a minute. She's going to get him a little more active, I hope. There, and then he begins to stretch into the contact. So it's those moments. So every time he comes up like that, there you go, and back into the stretch again. So even if it's just for a moment, send him more active. Every time that head comes up, just send him a little more actively and bring the forehand inside the circle. If you look carefully here, what you'll see is he's pulling to the outside of the circle all the time. His forehand is slightly outside the shoulder, outside the circle rather, that his hindquarters are on. So keep softening there a little bit, almost like you're trying to do a little shoulder four. In fact, that is what we ultimately do on the lunge line. And that's how we get them to work to the back a little more, bring the shoulder in. So once you can really control that position, and people will often ask me, you know, why I lunge the way I lunge, that is, I use the rein rather than using a cavesson. I do use a cavesson on young horses that I'm just starting, when they have not formed a contact with the bit. But with older horses, I always just work off the bit, and even as they get more experienced, because I want that contact. Now, you know, most people maybe don't have the hands that they are able to do that, but it even teaches you to ride a little bit, because you work with the line correctly on the lunge line, you know, just like you do when you ride. That's what I tell people all the time. You know, you have your leg, which is the whip, and the horse must be ahead of that leg, you know, and ride into a soft contact with your hand. So by lunging off the inside ring, once the horse stops pulling me around, and I have you know, an outside rein of some sort or other, so the bit can't pull through the horse's mouth, I can get contact, maintain it, and get the horse to stretch a little better. So once again here, that's what I'd like to see you doing, is getting him a little more active now, bringing the shoulder in just every time, and you're pretty much doing that. So that was not bad at all. And for those of you who say that that is not a classical way of doing it, I was actually taught to do it that way by Franz Rohovansky, who was once the head rider of the Spanish riding school, and from what I understood, actually was the one who trained some of the horses that Podolsky rode at the Olympics and these sort of things. And he was a great dressage trainer. Everyone that knew Rocky loved him, and he was a great classical horseman. And actually, as I said, he was the one who taught me how to do this, to lunge in this manner off the contact with the rings. So, and he was a classical master, certainly, per se. Like that. Now the walk is getting much better and stretching deeper into the contact. I like that. It's getting looser all the time. Once again, this is the right thing to do, to keep coming back to the walk, because the walk is the best thing he can do right now. That is, he walks more correctly than he does anything else. So once again, if you can keep him walking over his back like that, you're doing him good, and he will develop condition. And now, especially if you can add that, you know, to working a little bit outside, where he has that natural tendency, or I said, put a horse out in front of him, so we have a horse moving in front of him, that will maybe spark him up a little bit. Sometimes it's horses behind him. You know, you'll have to check and see what your horse is like, or maybe he doesn't care at all, and there are certainly some like that. But people will often say, you know, they want to ride out, and they'll tell me about riding up and down hills, like stretch here in the trot. This is much, much better. Much, much better now. He's swinging through better. And well, people will often ask me about going up and down hills, and they say they're building their horse's back, or they usually say I'm building the horse's butt when they're going up and down hills, which is really kind of what you're doing. You're building the back and the shoulders, but the butt and the shoulders, but you're not really building the back unless you're keeping the horse working over its back going up and down the hill. So just like everything else, going up and down hills is great for horses if they're connected to their top line, but if they're not, it's terribly hard on their legs because they're not really connected. So that's one of the tests of, when you see the jumpers come off the wall like that, the ones that are really round in their back, they can sit down and come down off of those big high derby banks, and stay under themselves and take the jump. But the ones that are hollow, you'll notice, are usually the ones that go crooked coming down the fence. So this, there's practical, uses for all of these things. It's not just because we want just to put the shock absorber system on the horse, but it makes everything work better, makes the horse safer for you because it's more balanced. Once again, we're getting some really good trot here. I love how he's stretching into that. And once again, every time he comes around, just bring the forehand in a little bit like you're doing there and make him more active and swinging on. So were it I think I would stick to nothing but this work for just a little while longer until you can start to see his canter look a little better and he's coming out with a little more energy. Once again, you might be able to just trot over a single pole on the ground, and I will do a lesson about that here very soon. I'll try to remember to do that and get it up on YouTube so you can see how to go about doing that. And you might also want to take a look at the long reining exercises. That could be good for this horse if you think you are physically up to doing that. But it's a bit of a challenge. And be sure if you decide to try to long rein that you go through all the steps that I outline in those videos. I think it's a 4 or 5 part series there about how to do that. But the walk is here much, much better. I love what you're doing here. This is the way to get this horse headed in the right direction. Just go do always what the horse can do correctly and do that. And if, not that we have to keep testing the waters, like we'll continue to come back to the canter. But as soon as you feel that the horse can't connect, just come back to the trot or the walk because it isn't worth it and it doesn't do the horse any good. What you're going to find is once the horse, as you experienced a little bit in your last tape, you said all of a sudden when you cantered his head became stiller. Well, that's exactly what's going to happen. When he is strong enough to canter, you will be able to canter him and he'll just do it like magic and he'll feel like a totally trained horse. Whereas if you fight the canter, all that's going to happen is, yes, he will become aerobically more fit, but he will also become a lot more unsound. That is because the faster you go, the more pressure is on the horse's legs. The more important that the horse be working over its back, and this is true of any kind of horse that's doing any kind of physical exercise. I mean, the difference between a racehorse. I've seen racehorses race careers and never even have a sore leg of any kind, and because the trainers knew what they were doing, So this isn't just for dressage. Remember, the classical foundation is simply the best way to work a horse, no matter what you're doing with it. Now, I love how the trot is really stretching here. It could just be a little bit more active, but I'm sure you'll get to that. But this is really in the right direction of what we want to have happen, and this, I think, is useful. So if I were you, I would stick with this for just a little while longer. I'd maybe even do a few weeks of work just like this, until he really just comes out and he just stretches into that contact and isn't such an effort to keep him going. Like right there, his back end is starting to slow down a little bit and it's, could be more active like there. He's kind of creeping along. So you want to make him a little more active so you get a little more swing to the back like that. Keep it going a little more actively. So that's the thing I'm seeing here. It's getting a little slow now. And remember to keep this to short periods of time. You don't want to be lunging for an hour at a time. If you're lunging correctly, it should take you less and less time. And this is about right. If this is about a 20-minute total, that should be what it takes to lunge a horse, about 20 minutes if you're not going to ride. And if you were going to ride, then you'd bring this horse to the best it could be on the lunge line, then you'd get on and see what you can do. Maybe what you can do, and that's the way you should start, is once you start riding, just walk for a while. Just get him around in the walk if you can, like you're doing. And then once you can keep it consistent in the walk, then try going to the trot. But don't be afraid to spend days doing it. This has been Will Faerber from Art to Ride with our good friend from Sweden, Tytti van Halen. We look forward to seeing her again soon, and I hope you've enjoyed this. Thank you very much for sending in your video, and I look forward to seeing your improvements in the near future. But he's really looking good. I encourage you to stay on track. Thanks so much. Once again, Will Faerber from Art to Ride.